Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever just delivered the kind of game that makes you stop everything and pay attention. Indiana walked into Atlanta expecting a battle, but what followed was a wild overtime thriller that had everything: momentum swings, late-game drama, huge individual performances, and a comeback that could become one of the defining moments of the Fever's season. The final score was Indiana 95, Atlanta 91, but that score barely tells the story. The Fever had to fight through an 8-point deficit, survive Atlanta's final chances in regulation, and then dominate the crucial moments of overtime.
And right in the middle of it all was Caitlin Clark. Clark finished with 26 points and 9 assists, once again demonstrating why every game she plays seems to produce another milestone or record conversation. But what made this performance special wasn't simply the number of points. It was the way Clark controlled the game when the pressure reached its highest level. Atlanta constantly tried to make things difficult for her, but Clark continued attacking, creating opportunities, moving the ball, and keeping Indiana's offense organized. This wasn't just a scoring performance. It was a leadership performance. Before we break down the biggest moments, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because if you're following Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, and the WNBA playoff race, you don't want to miss what's coming next. And comment below, was this the Fever's most impressive win of the season? Atlanta making it clear that Indiana wasn't going to have an easy night. The Dream played aggressively and forced the Fever to work for every offensive opportunity. Aliyah Gray was outstanding for Atlanta, eventually finishing with 32 points and keeping the Dream within striking distance throughout the game. Indiana responded through multiple players. Clark provided the playmaking and scoring, Kelsey Mitchell attacked offensively, and Aliyah Boston made her presence felt on both ends of the floor. But Atlanta continued to apply pressure, and by the end of the third quarter, the Dream had built an 8-point advantage. At that moment, Indiana was facing a serious problem. The Fever were on the road. Atlanta had momentum. The clock was running down. And the Dream looked like they were on their way to protecting their lead. But this is where the Fever showed something different. Instead of panicking, Indiana responded. The fourth quarter became a completely different basketball game. The Fever tightened up defensively, made important shots, and started attacking the basket with greater purpose. Atlanta suddenly couldn't create the same separation it had enjoyed earlier in the game. The deficit began shrinking. 8 points became 6. 6 became 4. 4 became 2. And then Kelsey Mitchell delivered one of the biggest shots of the night. With just over a minute remaining, Mitchell knocked down a three-pointer that tied the game at 81-81. Suddenly, the game Atlanta had controlled was completely up for grabs. The Dream had one final opportunity to win in regulation. And chaos followed. Atlanta had multiple chances around the basket, including opportunities involving Rhyne Howard and Angel Reese, but none of the attempts dropped. The buzzer sounded. Neither team had one. Overtime. For Indiana, this was no longer about surviving the fourth quarter. Now they had 5 additional minutes to prove which team was tougher. And that's when Makayla Timpson stepped into the spotlight. Timpson had already contributed throughout the game, but overtime turned her into one of the biggest stories of the night. She scored Indiana's first 3 field goals of the extra period and finished with a career-high 20 points. Think about that. The Fever had Caitlin Clark. They had Kelsey Mitchell. They had Aliyah Boston. And when the game reached overtime, it was Timpson who helped take control. That is exactly what playoff teams need. You can't rely on one superstar to save you every night. Eventually, defenses figure out ways to make things difficult. Eventually, shots don't fall. Eventually, someone else has to step forward. Timpson did. And while she was making huge plays, Clark continued doing what she does best, creating. Clark finished with 26 points and 9 assists, while also helping Indiana maintain its composure during the most important possessions of the game. That 9-assist total tells an important part of the story. Clark didn't have to force everything. She understood that Atlanta's defense was trying to take away her scoring opportunities, so she continued finding ways to create advantages for teammates. That's the evolution of her game. When opponents focus on her scoring, she becomes a playmaker. When they give her space, she can attack. When they pressure the ball, she can use her vision to find open teammates. And when the game becomes chaotic, she gives Indiana something extremely valuable: composure. But Clark wasn't the only Fever player who delivered. Aliyah Boston had one of her most complete performances of the night. She finished with 18 points, 14 rebounds, 5 steals, 4 assists and 3 blocks. That's an incredible all-around stat line. Boston was everywhere. She battled inside. She grabbed crucial rebounds. She created defensive plays. And she gave Indiana another reliable option whenever Atlanta tried to concentrate its attention on Clark. Then there was Kelsey Mitchell. Mitchell finished with 20 points and continued her incredible scoring consistency. Her late fourth-quarter three-pointer was one of the turning points of the entire game, and her ability to create offense gave Indiana another weapon when Atlanta tried to slow Clark down. This is what makes the Fever so interesting right now. They're not just Caitlin Clark. They're not just Kelsey Mitchell. They're not just Aliyah Boston. They're becoming a team with multiple ways to win. And that could be extremely important when the playoffs arrive. Because playoff defenses are different. Teams have more time to prepare. Opponents study every tendency. Every weakness gets attacked. If you're predictable, you're vulnerable. But Indiana is becoming harder to predict. If Clark gets trapped, Mitchell can score. If Mitchell is covered, Boston can attack inside. If Atlanta focuses on the stars, Timpson can punish the defense. That's how a team becomes dangerous. And the Atlanta game provided a perfect example. The Fever didn't win because everything went according to plan. They won because the plan stopped working, and they adapted. That might be even more important than the final score. The Fever were down 8 points entering the fourth quarter. They could have folded. Instead, they outscored Atlanta 17-9 in the final period and forced overtime. Then, once overtime arrived, Indiana outscored Atlanta 14-10. That's a comeback. That's resilience. And that's the kind of experience that can prepare a team for the postseason. Atlanta deserves credit, too. Aliyah Gray had a spectacular night with 32 points, and Angel Reese produced 15 points, 14 rebounds, and 6 assists. The Dream had opportunities to win this game. That's what makes Indiana's victory so impressive. The Fever didn't beat a team that simply collapsed. They beat a team that fought them all the way to the final seconds. They had to earn this one. And that is exactly why the victory could become so valuable. Indiana now carries another road win into the final stretch of the season, while continuing its winning streak and strengthening its position in the playoff race. But the bigger question is what this means for Caitlin Clark. Every Clark game seems to create another debate, another milestone, another record, another highlight. But perhaps the most important thing happening isn't a number. It's her leadership. Clark is learning how to control games in different ways. There are nights when she needs to score. There are nights when she needs to distribute. There are nights when she needs to push the tempo. And there are nights when she needs to slow everything down. The Atlanta game required all of it. And when the game was finally over, Indiana had another victory. Not a comfortable victory. Not an easy victory. A hard-fought overtime win. Those are the wins players remember. Those are the wins that build confidence. And those are the wins that can make a difference when playoff basketball arrives. Because eventually, Indiana will face another game where the opponent has the lead. Another game where Clark is heavily defended. Another game where every possession matters. The Fever will need to remember Atlanta. They'll need to remember how they responded. They'll need to remember that an 8-point deficit isn't the end of the story. They'll need to remember that someone like Timpson can step up. They'll need to remember that Mitchell can deliver a clutch shot. They'll need to remember that Boston can dominate the glass in defense. And they'll need to remember that Clark can remain calm while everything around her becomes chaotic. That's the real story of this game. Caitlin Clark's numbers were impressive. 26 points. 9 assists. Another major milestone conversation. But the bigger headline is the Indiana Fever's growth. This team is learning how to win different kinds of games. They're learning how to respond when things go wrong. They're learning how to trust their depth. And they're learning how to execute under pressure. The playoffs won't care how many games you won by 20. They'll care about what happens when the score is tied and there are 30 seconds left. They'll care about who can make the next play. Atlanta gave Indiana that test. And Indiana passed. So now the Fever move forward. Another win. Another comeback. Another overtime experience. Another reminder that Caitlin Clark and this Indiana team are becoming increasingly difficult to overlook. The question isn't whether Indiana can compete anymore. The question is how far this team can go. Can they make a deep playoff run? Can Clark continue rewriting the record book? Can Boston, Mitchell, and Timpson maintain this level? And perhaps most importantly, can the Fever turn these regular season battles into postseason victories? Only time will tell. But if this game against Atlanta is any indication, Indiana is ready for the challenge. Caitlin Clark didn't simply put up another impressive stat line. She helped lead her team through adversity. The Fever didn't simply win. They fought back. And Makayla Timpson didn't simply have a good night. She announced herself when the pressure was highest. That's why this 95-91 overtime victory could mean so much more than one game in the standings. It could be a preview of what's coming. A tougher Indiana. A deeper Indiana. A more confident Indiana. And a Caitlin Clark who continues to find new ways to influence the game. So now I want to hear from you. Was this Caitlin Clark's biggest performance of the season? Can the Indiana Fever make a serious playoff run? And after that incredible overtime performance, does Makayla Timpson deserve more responsibility moving forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark update. Because the season is getting closer to the games that matter most. And if Indiana keeps playing with this kind of resilience, the rest of the WNBA better be ready. The Fever aren't just surviving anymore. They're becoming dangerous, ***.